And we continue in the house of Perdomo. Thank you to Nick Perdomo for opening the doors here at headquarters. And I'm joined by one of my very good friends. It's Tony Hernandez. How are you, my friend?
I'm fantastic, man. What a pleasure joining you today.
There's a great story, and you hate involving yourself in this story. First of all, Tony is the owner and founder of the Latino Broadcasting Corporation.
Correct.
And is the founder of the Immigrant Archive Project. We're going to get into that, but I want to talk about how we met. I was watching on a streaming service. It was Netflix. You owe me a dime, Netflix. This documentary on Walter Mercado. And he's the astrology, he's the Latino Liberace. And I see you in it, okay, as sort of one of those experts, talking about the radio business and his impact. 3 days later, I'm on Calle Ocho here in Miami, and I run into you at a cigar shop. So sometimes I believe fates have put us together. So thanks for putting up with me, my friend.
No, man, it's great. It's great. Fate definitely plays a role. I remember that day that we met. You're like, wait a second. Didn't I just see you on Netflix? That was hilarious.
You on Netflix, and you're like, who is this guy? So, Tony, let's get into your story first.
Sure.
And the first question I ask everybody, because this is a cigar show,
right,
and we're in the house of Perdomo here, is how did the cigar find you? Because I don't think we find it. I think it finds us. So
You're so right.
How did the cigar find you?
You know, it was interesting, man. I came out of college in 1984, and I was fortunate enough to have landed a job at a brand new Spanish language radio station in New York.
Okay.
So it was kind of, a cool thing, right? A Cuban refugee kid working in Spanish language radio, and I always felt this connection to our culture. And there was a young producer at the station who was an avid cigar smoker. I'm like, wait a second, that's so cool. That's sort of like, part of our cultural heritage. Let me check it out. And I haven't put it down since.
Was it a good experience? I mean, I always get, I was at the liquor store and I had a Swisher Sweet. Was it a good experience, or did you say, what is this?
No, it was a wonderful experience. Actually, it was a good experience. It started like most guys, right, with like a light, mild cigar, and worked your way up to, I enjoy, full-bodied cigars now. I'm not sure I'd have that cigar for breakfast today, but it's what sort of eased me into it. Yeah,
I love it. All right, so let's talk about your story. You mentioned it, son of Cuban immigrants, and milk kind of is a big sort of story in getting you guys over to this country. Tell me about how milk played a part of that.
Yeah, milk definitely played a role, man. So I was born in 1962. Shortly after Castro came to power. And already things were starting to sort of roll downhill in Cuba. They were rationing food. The only way you could buy, your food staples was through a ration card. And milk, believe it or not, was extremely, extremely rationed. So I developed a calcium deficiency when I was about 2-3 years old. And the doctor told my old man, look, he just does not have enough milk. You're going to have to figure out a way to get him milk. And I think my father did what you and I and any other, reasonable father would do, is he turned to the black market and he bought 2 liters of milk.
He
purchased 2 liters of milk. And someone ratted him out, and for that they threw him in prison.
Jeez.
Yeah, if you could imagine, for buying a son with a calcium deficiency a couple of liters of milk.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, that was a big turning point. He was no fan of the government, but that certainly was a huge turning point. And we were fortunate to leave in 1967.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, and you ended up in New Jersey.
We ended up in New Jersey. My maternal grandparents had escaped aboard a small craft. I want to say it was like 30-something people aboard a 22-foot boat. They were lost at sea for a while, picked up by the Coast Guard, back when the Coast Guard would pick you up and bring you to the U.S.
Right.
And they were living in Hackensack, New Jersey. So, like the
Sinatra
old
country.
song, "A House Out in Hackensack," is that all you get for
Isn't
your
that
money?
Sinatra country?
No, actually, Hoboken is
Hoboken
Sinatra
is
country.
Sinatra country,
But
yeah.
you can hit it with a stone from Hackensack.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
And you have a Sinatra story. You're good friends with his ex-manager.
I do
right?
have a Sinatra story. I happened to walk into a cigar spot years ago, and was introduced to this elderly gentleman who sat down, started having a conversation. And turns out this guy managed Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Stephen Eady Gourmet, Don Rickles for like decades. And you can imagine, guys like us to sit there with Frank Sinatra's manager.
Right.
I was in heaven,
I mean, you're literally like this, just talk.
Exactly. I mean, to just be a fly on the wall, listening to his stories over the years has just been phenomenal. We've become very, very good friends today. Yeah.
Speaking of stories, and one of the reasons why I wanted you, and thank you for making the time.
No, my pleasure.
Tell me about the Immigrant Archive Project. It's a fascinating study. It's a fascinating experience. Tell me about that. What is it?
The Immigrant Archive Project is literally the largest oral history project on the immigrant experience in the U.S. It was sort of an idea that I came up with back in 2007, 2008, I think is when we first started interviewing folks on camera. Since then, we've documented well north of 3,000 stories. So we've interviewed Academy Award winners, Fortune 100 CEOs, Grammy Award winners, and migrant farm workers and factory workers like my parents, school teachers, single moms, and immigrants of all nationalities, not just Latino immigrants. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You said something that really, I think being in this country, we're all immigrants. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows what it's like to say goodbye to a family member.
Correct.
And that just hit me. And that's sort of the center of this project, isn't it?
That is the center of the project. Regardless of who you're speaking to, and I can draw parallels between a Vietnamese creative director at an ad agency on the West Coast and Ralph de la Vega's story. Ralph de la Vega, you might know, was CEO of AT&T, mm-hmm. Cuban, like us, arrived in the U.S. at like 9 years of age without his parents, without a penny in his pocket. And if you look at both their stories, they're sort of mirror images of one another, Mm-hmm. So there were certainly a lot of universal experiences within that. And part of it is, saying goodbye to your family and friends, saying goodbye to the culture that the language, the food, what I think has been dramatically different in the case of the Latino immigration is we've managed to hang on to our culture a lot more than previous waves. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that goes back to the fact that, we didn't have to travel as far, right? Whether you're coming in from Latin America or from the Caribbean. And then at the time that we came in, because our immigration is relatively recent, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. The big Latino boom happened post-1965. Back, if you look at the 1960 census, Latinos were only 5% of the United States in 1960. In 1960, Latinos were just 5% of Miami-Dade. We're now 73%.
That's hard to believe. Living in Miami full time, that is hard to believe.
Imagine?
Yes.
Can you imagine? Yeah, only 5%. So in many cases, we've sort of begun the process of transforming the nation. When you look at our impact, we've affected everything from the foods we eat, the music we listen to, the films and television shows we watch, even the way America perceives the issue of race today. Prior to that big Latino boom, when you would mention minorities in this country, the default setting was you were referring to African Americans. Right. Because we were 5%. Yeah. Asians at the time were just 1%. Yet, again, after that 1965 legislation and that boom in immigration, Asians went from being, a blip on the radar screen to a fact I just came across the other day, which I thought was fascinating. There are more Chinese restaurants in the United States today than Burger Kings, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chickens, and Wendy's combined.
Wow.
Yeah. And that all happened literally in the last 50, 60 years.
Well, and not to get into the weeds of marketing or television, but I was doing a presentation to a television network about soccer in this country.
Right.
And if I told you the most watched soccer league in the United States, it's not the English Premier League, it's not the German Bundesliga, it's Liga MX.
Oh, absolutely.
The Mexican soccer, Mexican soccer league. Absolutely. And I just remember their eyeballs. So it's sort of like that's the impact.
It's bigger than most people realize.
Mm-hmm.
You go back, you rewind the clock just a little bit, and you had Latino music stars changing their names to Americanize their names, or in the case of like a Julio Iglesias, literally jonesing to record with any English language celebrity, right? Like when he recorded with Willie Nelson, it was a huge thing. Now that crossover cuts the other way.
Right.
You've got dudes like Bad Bunny the biggest music. I mean, more streaming, more views on his videos, more than any other artist in the last 2 years. And now it's general market American artists looking to record with him, and he's never recorded in English.
I listened to something when Vicente Fernandez, who's the, I would say the Mexican Frank Sinatra.
Right.
Or you could say Frank is the American Vicente Fernandez, whichever way you want to go with that. George Strait, the country music artist, recorded, Vicente's big hit was El Rey, the King.
Right.
George Strait did a Spanish, he did it in Spanish.
Wow.
And that's where you just say exactly to your point.
Correct. It's a huge market.
Yeah.
It's a huge market.
So, getting back to the Immigrant Archive Project, there had to be something that when you're talking to this person, what was the most impactful, emotional sort of, just you're like, wait a minute, I need to take a break. Forget you taking a break. It just hit so home for you.
You know, there have been several. One that literally took me weeks to sort of recover from was a fascinating on-camera conversation I had with the Mexican crooner Jose Jose. If you remember, you know, Jose Jose was arguably, you know, one of our biggest music stars in the 1980s. And he just sort of catapulted to, you know, heights that hadn't been seen before in music. And then he completely disappeared. And he had developed a really bad drug habit. And on camera, his voice was, you know, severely compromised, no longer that, you know, that golden tone, was sort of hard to listen to. And he explained how for years people had no idea where he was. And he was basically homeless, living with 2 other drug addicts in the back of an abandoned taxi cab in Mexico City.
And this is one of the biggest recording artists ever in the world.
Bar none. Phenomenal. An absolute beast. An absolute beast. And the way he was sort of rescued by his second wife, which was, I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing story. I don't want to bore you with the details, but so much suffering, so much pain behind the story. Another one was an actor by the name of Antonio Jaramillo, who I didn't have a chance, which is rare. I didn't really have a chance to do my homework on this guy. He reached out to me. We had received an award in LA a couple of months earlier. He said, hey, if you're ever back in LA, I'd love to share my story with the project. So we squeezed him in, came in. All I knew was he was an actor. And I asked him, I'm like, so what are your earliest childhood memories? He said, well, they weren't very good because I was raised in an orphanage. I'm like, really? Wow. So yeah, my mom dropped my brother and I at an orphanage, and we made a pact that we would never be separated. So you either adopt both or we don't go.
Package deal.
You got it. He goes, so what you learn very quickly is very few people want to adopt an orphan. Nobody wants to, okay? So I think he was like 15 when someone, you know, came down, tapped him on his shoulder, said there's someone here to adopt you. And it was his biological mother. His biological mother returned.
The hairs on my arm are standing.
You got it, man. And that's what happened to me sitting on camera with Antonio. And she literally came back and explained, look, man, I had lost my job. I had no money to feed you. And rather than starving on my watch, I figured at least here, they'll take care of you. I'm leaving for the US to find some work and hopefully come back for you one day. And she did. And she did. And he found his way. And today he's starred in films with directed by Oliver Stone. He's worked opposite Benicio del Toro and John Travolta and Jennifer Lopez. No, he's a beast. He's a beast.
Wow. For you personally, you know, and I think we're burying the lead, so to speak, in that this project is being inducted into the U.S. Library of Congress. Now, when you got that email or call, it shows you of your passion and your work. Well, I mean, what did that do for you?
It was an incredibly emotional moment, and it was interesting because it came through in the form of an email, and it wasn't even addressed to me. It was, to the contact information at the Immigrant Archive Project, and it was addressed to whom it may concern. And it went on to explain that they had stumbled upon our work, and that the Library of Congress had designated our project a culturally and historically significant body of work for the United States. excuse me. So they decided to archive it at the library in perpetuity. Yeah.
And then also now that means you are archived in perpetuity. By the way, I mean, I think we all we all want to make a difference. We all want to do, have our little our little grain of sand in the world. And I know you're a humble guy, and I'm pushing you on this, but this has got to make you feel like, I'm just Tony Hernandez from New Jersey.
It doesn't. It really doesn't. I'll tell you what it does do. I'll tell you why it really moved me. When you ask people to come on camera, as I have thousands of times, and to share their story with you on camera, and like your interviews, I've seen all of them. I get into the weeds with people, right? I ask them, questions that reveal who they are,
right?
And time again, I can't tell you how many. Excuse me. Time and time again, I can't tell you how many have, after the interview, have approached me and asked me for a full copy of the interview.
Right.
And I always ask them why, although I know the reason why. 99.9% of the times they'll say, because I discussed things with you on camera that I've never discussed with my wife or my children. Wow. So when people open up to that level, there's a responsibility that I've always felt to do something very meaningful with this work. So, okay. So by now having it archived at our nation's premier library in perpetuity, I feel like, okay, mission accomplished. I haven't let 3,000 people down. Yeah.
Never a doubt, my friend. So for you growing up, what was the most impactful moment in terms of that led you to the way you think, the way you feel? Was it something you saw your parents do? Was it something that happened? What sort of was an impetus for you to do what you do?
That's a great question. I would say that what led me to create the Immigrant Archive Project in particular, and I've done other things aside from the IAP, but what led me to do that was the examples that I saw at home from my parents and from the men and women of their generation. I literally remember being a 5-year-old kid in Hackensack, New Jersey, right? Coming back from school, and my old man at the time worked 2 full-time jobs, literally 7 days a week. I think he had his first day off after being in the U.S. for 3 years. I mean, like Christmas, Thanksgiving, the guy was a beast. And he comes home one day and he says, "Man, do you realize how lucky your father is?" I'm a 5-year-old kid. I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Check this out, Tone. On Fridays, instead of 1 check, I get 2. And while the other fathers are out drinking beer and hanging out on the weekends, I get paid for those days too because I'm working. How lucky is your old man?" So, that always stuck with me, that mindset, right? You could look at life like, geez, I'm 30 years old. I've got 2 kids. We're living in a 2-room apartment in a roach-infested area in Hackensack, New Jersey.
And what I always say, with a Z in my name.
You got it. You got it. But they never looked at life as anything other than we've been given a really wonderful opportunity to make something of ourselves in a country where we can disagree with the government, we can speak freely and not, we can buy 2 liters of milk and not wind up in prison, So it was that, which I consider them to be our greatest generation, right? Yeah, those that as adults came with small children, left everything behind. And as we all know the story, they came here with nothing. The flip side of that is in the mid 2000s, I started seeing sort of the conversation, I started seeing the conversation around immigration take a very negative turn.
Yeah.
And immigrants were being vilified and blamed for all kinds of things. So I said, you know what? What if I gave the average Joe on the street access to the dinner table conversations I listened in on when I was a kid, Right. And that, which I thought maybe we'll record a couple dozen interviews, turned into, really rewarding, rich, invaluable experience for me.
My good friend Brian Waters, who has a shop in Fayetteville, Arkansas, said something to me, and he's like, "I stole this, so if you're stealing it, you're stealing it twice removed." He has a line that says, "Cigars are portable campfires." They're a way of, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a 9-to-5er, they take care of us all. How has the cigar impacted you as an adult, and I'm not necessarily as a professional or anything like that, but I mean, like, we met over cigars.
Yeah. I love storytelling.
Right.
I love doing what we're doing here now. And there are two things that are really conducive to meaningful conversations. One is a good meal, right? You sit around a good meal and the world kind of stops. And the other thing is the cigar.
Right.
Unlike the meal, however, the cigar I find to be the ultimate equalizer. Now, I'm sure you've experienced this, right?
Yeah.
We've been to a lot of cigar shops across the country. It's the only space that I know of that you can have, an Ivy League educated professor, a plumber, an avid Trump supporter, someone that has voted for Joe Biden gladly, and kumbaya.
Right.
And
they fire up a Perdomo, and it's
you
all
fire
right.
up a cigar, and it's okay to not be on the same page.
Yeah.
And there's respect, and there's acceptance, and there's sort of that shared experience. I haven't found it anywhere else.
Yeah, a couple more from a couple more from me. So, as you've gone through the radio world, the TV world, and everything like that, where do you think media is? Because unfortunately, I think it's everything is clicks and likes and influencers and just throwing everything up against the wall. But are we in a good place media wise? Because I know my opinion of it, and for a person who actually produces content and throws it out into the universe, where are we going?
That's a heavy question.
Yeah,
that's a heavy question. I think media and
because isn't there a responsibility?
There is a responsibility, but when media becomes a for-profit business, and the responsibility becomes first and foremost to the shareholders, it's a very, very slippery slope. I'm not sure news should be a for-profit entity. When you're chasing after that clickbait, right, when you're sending out, headlines that you're just using to attract audience, it can become very dangerous. And we're seeing how polarized the nation is.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I think we can solve a lot of our problems by getting together with a group of people around cigars.
I'm with you. Throw a steak and a scotch, and then that's it.
You got it. Five minutes, it's over. We can agree on stuff.
Everything is solved.
Correct.
What interview? Maybe I know the Immigrant Archive Project has been very. It's been chicken soup for the soul for you.
Yeah.
But aside from that, has it been? Because I'm sure you've sat down with some heavy hitters in the world. Is there something where you said, I'm just Tony from Hackensack, and I'm sitting with this person?
That happens to me all the time with Elliot Wiseman.
Yes, the Sinatra's
with
manager.
Sinatra's guy.
Yeah.
With Sinatra's guy. Listen. The man was the confidant of arguably the biggest entertainer of the previous century. One could say the top three entertainers in the 20th century were Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson never had a confidant. He's gone. There's no one that was like his dude in the corner that can tell you, gone. Elvis had it. It was Colonel Tom Parker. Both are gone. The only living soul that was a confidant of one of those three is Elliot Wiseman. And to the point where he was made executor of Sinatra's will. And by the way, this is a funny story. When Sinatra tapped him to be the executor of the will, he said, look, I appreciate this. I'm humbled, but why me? He says, you're the only one that knows where everything is fucking buried.
Literally and figuratively.
Correct. So, to sit with this guy and hear these stories, and he was, privy to a lot of interesting conversations and interesting company, someone who'd, been out for dinner with Jacqueline Onassis, and, it's humbling.
Yeah.
It's humbling.
I bet. I've always said this, and it's almost ad nauseum. You want to be successful, talk to successful people.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to talk to you. What's in that DNA of yours? What gets you up? What gets you in the morning, and keeps you moving?
I think what keeps me moving is doing what I love.
Yeah.
You know, doing what I really, really enjoy. You know, and it's you know, you've heard it 1,000 times. It's, you know, when what you do is what you love, you never work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's absolutely true. And that's absolutely true. And that's come back to me throughout countless conversations and interviews that I've conducted. You know, I had a sit-down interview a few years ago with a woman named Victoria Alonso. I don't know if the name rings a bell.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria, arguably the most powerful woman in Hollywood. Okay, she's president of Marvel Studios.
Okay.
So she has producer credits on 8 out of the top 10 highest-grossing films of all time. So I asked Victoria Alonso, you know, how do you define success? She said, you know, it's very, very easy for me to define success. She goes, every morning I drop my daughter off at school. And I get to the corner of X and Y out in LA, drop her off at school. When I come to the next traffic light, if I make a left, I'm at the beach in 2 blocks.
Mm-hmm.
If I turn right, I'm in bumper to bumper traffic for the next hour and a half heading to my office. She goes, at this stage in my life, I could turn left. And every single time, I'm very, very happy to be stuck in traffic and head to the right. So, you know, again, as long as you're doing what you love and you're passionate about it, it's easy to get out of bed every day and do what you do.
And that's how you would define success?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Well, in Miami, there's beach everywhere. So.
And I can't tell you the last time I've been to the beach.
Hence the success.
There you go.
It's Tony Hernandez, Immigrant Archive Project. Where can we find it?
ImmigrantArchiveProject.org. And all of our social media handles. So there's a YouTube channel, there's a LinkedIn page, there's an Instagram page.
How many hours of content on there?
Over 3,000, probably closer to 3,500 hours of content. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's crazy.
That's success right there.